I'm just going to welcome everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Coaching. My name is Kemp, the owner of Business by Design. I help people advance their personal peak performance in business and personal life. And I'm an executive coach and licensee facilitator to Leadership Management International. Today we've got Christopher Kemp, who's back with us, clinical psychologist, who has a vast array of abilities and education and background. Chris, thank you for joining us today on Lunchtime Coaching.
Thanks for having me again, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, so last week we had a really fun conversation. We specifically spoke around mental health and the importance of mental health, and why it really, affects so many people in the world. And the first thing that sort of comes to mind is the big depression word, the big D, right? Chris, to kick it off, and I'm just, while you're busy talking, I'm not listening. I'm just making sure we go live and everything. But Perfect. To kick it off, I want to ask you, why is the world so depressed? I know it's a big question, but, just from, objectively from your perspective, what are you noticing and why do you think, I mean, besides the fact that COVID is what it is, some of the stats that I have about depression is 1 in 4 South Africans are depressed currently, or going through some kind of mental issue. Why is it that we are so depressed? Why do you think that is?
Kevin, in my opinion, I'd say a lot of it is kind of social issues. So there's a famous psychologist called Maslow who came up with a sort of hierarchy of needs that he believed every human has. And I suppose it's not perfect, but sort of right at the bottom is stuff like food security and connecting with other people, physical security, things like that. So all the kind of basic needs of people. And then sort of above that is stuff like self-actualization and achieving your dreams and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that the world at the moment especially, and also for the last few years, has sort of been in such crisis, financial, economic crisis, that I think it really makes it hard for a lot of people to struggle to meet those basic needs, where they have to work harder, they have to work longer, and so they have to do all of that just in order to achieve the most important stuff. If you are hungry, you're not thinking about anything else other than making money to get food. And so there's not really much room for the other stuff that fulfills us psychologically and mentally, in terms of sort of working a job that satisfies us, or having room for family or friends, or socializing, achieving our own personal goals. We are all just trying to kind of survive a lot of the time. Obviously, to more or lesser extent, everyone has different needs and their pyramid looks a little bit different. But I think that's one of the biggest reasons, is that we have to neglect all of the stuff that sort of favors our mental health in order to take care of our physical needs first. And I think that's obviously been exacerbated by the pandemic, and obviously this country really suffering economically. So I think it's very prevalent here as well.
So part of what I have been through in my own personal capacity has been diagnosed as clinically depressed. And, that was way back when, before I, really wanted to understand what my brain was doing and why I was going through what I was going through. But essentially, would it be fair to say that, is there a theme that because I am disconnected and I'm not as connected as I'd like to be with my environment or with people, that sort of leads to depression? Because essentially, from not being, I mean, especially now with COVID, that pushing us into sort of silos and into our homes only, that disconnected feeling, how much does disconnection play into me finding myself quite depressed and really not feeling 100%?
Yeah, I think it's massive. I mean, coming back to what I was saying in terms of those sort of needs, the need to connect with people, the social needs, the need to interact with others or to be stimulated in different ways. Even the people who are lucky enough to be economically safe at the moment, those people have had the sort of upper levels of their pyramid taken away. I don't want to say artificially, but by the sort of restrictions that the pandemic places upon us as well. So even if you have your bottom levels in order, your top levels are taken away by the need for physical safety in terms of virus spreading and things like that. So I think it's pretty massive. And I think that a lot of people have found that this digital substitute doesn't really quite cut it. As human beings, we are social creatures. We need to connect with others, and we need to do so in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. So to kick off with some of the questions that I have sent that we can talk about today, do you find that people are too quick to jump onto antidepressants? And talk to us about the fact that when do we know that, okay, cool, now's the time, I've got to that point where I need to actually start taking medicine. Where's that fine line? What am I looking for when I'm sort of looking at taking medication?
I think the tricky thing is that, we always say as psychologists, we always tell people that they're the expert in their own lives, and nobody really knows themselves better than they do in terms of what their baseline is. So whenever you're looking at any kind of mental illness or any sort of emotional struggles, you're working from a baseline, and only you really know what your baseline is because it's a deviation from that norm. So that's why a lot of people can sort of recognize in themselves, hey, I'm not okay, I'm not really doing well. I almost feel like I'd rather people got on antidepressants too early rather than too late. I don't think it's necessarily harmful to take them if you just are feeling really not quite yourself. You can take a low dose and you're not going to be harming yourself in any way. It's not going to have a detrimental outcome. So I wouldn't want people to question their own feelings or invalidate their own emotional experience, being like, yeah, I'm struggling, but I can get through this, or I don't need that. If you feel like you can benefit, if you feel like you need help, it's so important to not be afraid to seek help. I think that's really the biggest thing. So I think this sort of tough mindset that we all kind of adopt is sort of damaging to our mental health, in the sense that we feel like we should just get over it, or we should just be able to move past something. And there's no reward for doing that. There's no prize for neglecting your own emotional experience. If you feel like you need help, whether it's therapy, whether it's talking to a friend, whether it's medication, seek out those options, chat to someone, see if it's right for you. Don't feel like you need to cross some sort of imaginary threshold in order to get to that point, because that's when we can leave things too late and when we can really start impacting our work, our relationships, things like that. Rather get help if you feel like you need it.
Yeah. So in terms of like what you're saying now is that don't put on that brave face. Like if you need the help, speak to someone about it. And why do you think that depression has such a stigma attached to it? Because never mind that it has a further stigma across the board between men and women. I know that and this is just my assumption from what I've experienced is, if a woman is depressed, you can still you can go by it. You can say, oh, okay, cool, she has depression. But when a man has depression, it's kind of going, people have a different sort of take on it. But that's just, from what I've experienced. Is that something that you've experienced also as well? And why do you think there's such a stigma?
So I think in terms of the gender split, I think it's been normalized that women are more emotional. I don't think that that's true at all. I think women are more outwardly expressive of their emotions. I think there's various factors for that. Potentially the fact that it's seen as more normalized for them to express emotions. But my experience, especially in private practice, in seeing many men in therapy, is that everybody experiences emotions. It's just how much you show them or how much you let other people see that. And I feel like men feel like they need to hide them more. There's all the stigmas, the boys don't cry and all that kind of stuff. And we tend to socialize our children that way, in terms of you need to be tough and you need to do this. And what we're really doing is invalidating that emotional experience. And it's something we'd love to try and move away from as much as possible. But, that stigma follows women as well, in the sense that if a woman gets frustrated and tearful in the workplace, for example, that's seen as weak or, working with women, and things like that, which is also completely unfair and unwarranted. How people choose to express their emotions is up to them, and really it's men's discomfort with tears that dictates that response, rather than any weakness from the woman who's tearful. So yeah, I think it's very frustrating. I wish that we could do away with all of that. The more we express our emotions and the more we normalize having emotions, I think the better. to answer kind of the other part of your question, I think across the board there is the illusion that emotions can be controlled. There's the illusion that mental health is a mindset. If you just are positive, you can get through it. And giving into your emotions, even that language, right? Giving in is seen as kind of weak, which is nonsense. But unfortunately, it's pervasive. So if you're in a car accident, nobody faults you for not being at work. If you're depressed, people think you should be able to kind of get over it. To some extent, you can force yourself to continue working in a way that you can't with a physical ailment, but you are looking at major problems down the line when all those suppressed emotions come back in a much more bigger and more threatening way. So yeah, again, I think we discussed this last week, but there's a massive need to normalize mental health struggles, to allow people time and space to take a mental health day from work. You don't have to have the flu. You could just really be having a bad mental health day, but everyone will lie and say that they have the flu. And I think that happens all the time. People are taking mental health days, but pretending it's something physical because that's acceptable. And yeah, I think it comes back to this insane pressure that's on everyone to work, to perform, that they don't really feel like they can afford to or can represent that they are struggling, because it's seen as sort of a reflection of their competence, which couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, and just sticking to sort of the manifesting symptoms, perhaps. Do symptoms for depression show up differently for men and women, or are they kind of the same? Do they have the same kind of response? Is it the similar thing I can look out for, or are they quite different in how we experience them?
So in terms of sort of like the DSM, which is the psychiatric handbook, in terms of the classification of depression, the symptoms are across the board. There's no gender split. That being said, a sort of a kind of a pattern or a trending idea, but this isn't true for everyone, is that men in general tend to be more externalizing and women tend to be more internalizing. So women suffering from depression might tend to socially isolate, might tend to sort of ruminate, where you sit with your feelings and you really think through them a lot, and it sort of gets you more and more down and you can't really face the world. Whereas men might engage in more destructive behaviors, or they might show more aggression, because contrary to what a lot of people think, anger and irritability is a symptom of depression. It doesn't just mean being sad. So men may engage in more of that. They may engage in alcohol or drugs, things like that. So very externalizing behaviors. Those are just very, very general patterns, but it is a sort of pattern that we see in terms of a gender split. But if I can talk a little bit in terms of the main stuff you should be looking out for if you're asking yourself, am I depressed? Of course, a low mood, a pervasive low mood where you have several days where you sort of just feel down. That's sort of the obvious baseline. Aside from that, a lot of it comes down to changes, because it manifests differently. So some people sleep more, some people sleep less. Some people have more of an appetite, some people have less of an appetite. So I always tell people, look out for changes in yourself. If you're sleeping more or eating more, if something changes in terms of your eating and your sleeping, be aware of that. Feeling fatigued, feeling drained. Obviously, if you're having any kind of suicidal thoughts or just general feelings of hopelessness. One of the really big ones to watch out for is if you are no longer enjoying things that you used to enjoy. That's quite big. So if you just love to come home and crack open a beer and watch sports or something, but you find that you're not getting any fulfillment from that, you're just not enjoying it, or you have a hobby or something that you enjoy and it's just not really firing those neurons for you anymore. You're just not really feeling it. That's a big symptom of a depression, and generally definitely a marker of you should seek help. You are not in a great space if that's what you're experiencing. And I think those are kind of the big ones. And again, just look out for a change in yourself. Just look out for that feeling of not really feeling like yourself. Are you snapping at people more? Are you more impatient? Do you feel like you can't cope? Social isolation is the other big one. You don't want to see people. You don't want to spend time with people. You don't want to get out of bed. Generally, depression is much worse in the morning. So the hardest thing part of your day is probably getting out of bed and facing the world.
Okay, so I mean, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, but I'm just thinking from my perspective, just because I'm having a bad week, and I don't, maybe something's gone wrong in my life, and I feel really low, and I don't want to see anyone. Does it mean I have depression?
So generally with depression, when we talk about what we call a major depressive episode, you're looking at a period of about 2 weeks. 2 weeks to a month where persistently you're feeling this way. So that sort of allows room for, like you say, kind of the bad days or just sort of a bad patch. You can also sort of look towards your environment. Is there a very stressful time going on at work? Do you have a deadline that you feel like is really getting you down? And then you can think, well, I know that I need to hand this report in by the 30th and it's really stressing me out. So let me see how I feel after the 30th when this is all done. For example. But the danger with that is don't feel like because there's a reason that you can anchor your depression to, that it means that you're not depressed. You can still be depressed because of environmental factors, and you can still seek support and help with that. But yeah, the baseline is sort of a 2 week period where you persistently are feeling this way.
And I mean, someone gave me advice the other day and said if it does persist, he puts it in his calendar, and he goes, okay, cool. If I check in 2 weeks and I still feel like I felt that day, I need to go and see someone. And I was like, I think it's a simple sort of practical tool to be able to kind of go, well, let me have that check in with myself to go, okay, cool. In 2 weeks, if I'm still feeling that way, then take some action. But essentially, Chris, we know a lot of people are experiencing COVID in the way that they are, and obviously the impacts that it's having. Are we seeing that depression as you know, the global kind of topic that we're talking about? Does it really manifest differently in South Africans than it does across the world? Is there any kind of difference that we notice there?
So the tricky thing when it comes to mental health in general, and this is a whole separate can of worms in a way, but I'll try to keep it brief. But generally, when you're looking at mental illness of any kind, you are looking at a deviation from the norm. So we have a baseline of normal expected behavior, and then we have the sort of deviation that tells us, okay, you're struggling or something's not right here. Especially if you're looking at sort of severe mental illnesses where you might be experiencing delusions or hallucinations, things like that, right? So generally, we're looking at a deviation from the norm. Where this gets tricky is how we decide what is normal. And that's why I say you are the expert in your own life. If there's a cultural element at play, if there's some behavior that in some cultures might look like mental illness if you were looking at it from a purely Western perspective. So in South Africa, this gets tricky because all these textbooks are written from sort of the American, European, Western perspective, right? South Africa is obviously very culturally diverse, and what might be a normal expression of grief or a normal expression of stress or something like that in a certain culture might look like, oh, this is a big warning sign for depression. So that's why I say it's important to do that sort of self-check-in and feel like, is this abnormal for me? Am I struggling? That's why I'm hesitant to always give like sort of a list of symptoms, because it might just not fit with you. So if you're thinking about the symptoms I've given today, for example, and you feel like, well, I don't really have any of that, but I really don't feel like myself. That's enough. That's enough. Don't feel like you need to tick boxes in order to seek help. You know yourself. If you are not feeling yourself, if you feel like emotionally you're struggling, you're not in a good place, seek help. Don't worry about conforming to the exact tick box list of symptoms.
Chris, also, I mean, considering we're living in South Africa, it's not the safest environment that for people to live in. So I think external factors like that could also really amp that up. And what I noticed from having been through this process, but also, really loving human behavior and always trying, searching and learning as much as I can about it. Do you also find that people go through a process of quite obvious symptoms, but because part of our brain wants to convince us, no, well, we live in South Africa, this is normal. It's normal to feel this way. I felt like this for the last year. For us to kind of try and normalize it in our head some way, and then a year later I'm almost dying from a heart attack, or I'm constantly sleeping and I don't have any time for my children, or whatever that is. Do you find that we because of our we don't know enough about it, and we don't speak enough about it, and there's not enough information just generally out there that especially around corporate mental health, that people are normalizing those moments that they're actually going through, and it's not okay?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's such a great question and such a great thing you bring up, because I've been speaking so much about your normal and deviation from normal. But I think the problem you're highlighting is what happens when that baseline shifts. What happens when what we are willing to accept as normal shifts? And sometimes we need to take a step back and say, actually, that's not normal. And I think that you're so right in terms of where society's at, is that we are communicating with other people. But if all your friends are bitching and moaning about work, if everyone you know feels like they're working till 8 o'clock and have no time with their families and whatever the case may be, you kind of start to feel like, okay, but I need to get on with it because everyone else is getting on with it. So that's where it comes in with that idea of invalidating your emotional experience. It's not okay for me to feel this way because everyone feels this way, and I just need to get on with it because they're getting on with it.
Yeah, just man up a bit. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
That's
and
what
that's
people would
again
say,
that
yeah.
Exactly, and that's the same stuff, right? The man up, all that stuff that gets thrown at men and women. But yeah, I think like we discussed, men even more so in terms of suppressing feelings and just getting on with it and being the strong whatever. Hate that. So yeah, I think it's a great thing that you raised, and that we need to interrogate or question what is normal. Is this normal? And rather, instead of framing things in terms of what other people are doing or what you feel like you should be doing, just question yourself and where you're at and how you are actually feeling. Are you struggling? Are you coping? If you are, it's okay. You can't control your emotional experience, so don't try to, and don't feel like you have to. So I think it's a great point that you bring up, the shifting of what is normal.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, it's so highlighted, and I'm sure this is such, you would have so much to add to this, is that because we've in COVID, because we're in lockdown, part of our brain wants to convince us that, oh, okay, cool, we'll just live this new normal, but we are very caught up in a really shitty situation that is we've never been in before, and this isn't normal. This to what, for the sake of using that norm or that word, is it's okay to really just get your brain wrapped around not being normal right now, and not being 100%, and not coping, and maybe phoning someone and getting the help and speaking to people, because we're not in a very normal situation right now. And I think that's probably why, like we mentioned, that base foundation where we think, okay, well, this is where we really function, and it's really raised, purely by the external factors of where we find ourselves.
I really, good thing that has come out of this, I feel like, is that it has normalized that idea of talking to other people, and normalized the idea of struggling with mental health, because now it's an experience that everyone is going through. It's not just people who are struggling with depression. All the people with depression are going, yo, guys, you see, it sucks. Like, this is my everyday, Yeah. So I think it's been good in that sense. Obviously, we don't want people to suffer and struggle, but it's been good that it's normalized the conversation, and more people, it was sort of this game of chicken, emotional chicken, that everyone was playing for a while. And then someone has to be the first one to say, I'm really struggling. And someone goes, thank God, me as well. I really am as well, and it's just letting those walls down and being able to be vulnerable. And you realize that a lot of people are actually feeling the same way you are, but we're all doing the dance where we're all pretending to be fine. But none of us are. And so, yeah, I think if you are able to normalize that in your own groups, in your family, in your social circles, amazing.
Chris, so I mean, I know we don't have a hell of a lot of time, and I love talking about this stuff. I get so passionate about it. But just before we give everyone some tips and tricks to be able to take away from today, are there different types of depression? Because it's sort of cloned as this one thing, and those are your symptoms, so you're obviously that. Are there different types of depression? And also, how do we help loved ones? Those are two things that are quite key for me.
So I think that there definitely are different types of depression. I won't get into the psychiatric part of it because I don't think it's really that important. I think
Yeah,
that, I always say when people come to private practice and they say, I'm depressed, I'm like, cool. What does that mean? Because I feel like it really tells me very little about you and what your experience is. So everyone
yeah,
experiences depression differently. Everyone is going through different experiences. So yeah, try and not distill it down to the label because the label's not really that important. What's important is that you're struggling, that you're not okay, and that you need support. So yeah, like I said, the big differences are the idea that depression means sadness, means you crying all the time. It can actually be you very angry and frustrated and very irritable, and people don't like being around you because you have no patience and a short temper. That's also depression, and I think that's the biggest one I'd want to highlight because people always think sad and they never think angry. And I think
yeah.
that's the main one I'd want you to be sort of aware of. Beyond that, like I say, just different from your baseline, not coping, not doing okay. Like I said, it's different for everyone. Some people eat a ton and don't sleep, and some people stop eating and sleep all the time. So yeah, it's about the differences that I think are big there. In terms of supporting loved ones, I think the biggest thing is, especially as parents or caregivers, especially if you're speaking to someone like that you feel like you sort of look after, don't try and fix it. It's not something that you can fix. So what a lot of people fall into the trap is of giving advice. So you'll say, "Wow, I've really been struggling there." And they'll say, "Oh, you know what? Have you tried going for a walk? I found that really helps me." And like, are you eating properly? And all this stuff. And you have the best intentions, but what it makes that
Yeah.
person feel is you don't understand what the hell I'm going through. If you think a walk is going to help me, you don't have a clue what I'm going through. So don't try and fix it. Just be there to listen. Just connect with the experience. Say, wow, that sounds really awful. Can you tell me more about what you've been feeling? Or, sure, that sounds so hard. They just want someone to recognize what they're feeling and to be able to connect with it. You do not need to fix it. Take all that pressure off of yourself because you can't fix people's feelings, right? Give them space to talk about it. That's what they need. And that's how we help feelings, is by giving people room to express them. That's what therapy is all about. So yeah, step
And
away from advice.
and I mean that's as one of the highest human needs that we have in life is just for someone to acknowledge you, right? So you just
Absolutely.
want someone to be able to sit and say, well, just tell me what you're going through and tell me your version of it and tell me how you experience it, because the more you give that space, and that I love the fact that like you don't need to fix someone, you just need to be there to show that you support them.
Absolutely.
Chris, so if we, I mean, mental health is such a big conversation and depression is such a big conversation, but if we can give practical tools about what can we do to sort of pay attention to how I'm doing at the moment, and what are the steps that I could possibly take to sort of curb this, so that, I can catch myself before I get to having to go through a lot of maybe diagnosis or actual tablets and drugs and stuff. What are the steps that I can take to start curbing myself and paying attention to me from curbing myself getting into depression?
For sure. So I think one of the big ones, if you feel like you are slipping into some kind of depression, and even if you are depressed, one of the big things we often talk about is opposite action. Depression is almost like a parasite that wants to keep you there. So all the things that you want to do when you're depressed are all the worst things for you. Depression will make you want to stay in bed all day, not interact with people, not shower, not look after yourself. So we often talk about opposite action. So get out of bed, even though it's the last thing you feel like. Shower, get dressed, talk to other people. Yeah, try and get out of the house. All that, well, difficult at the moment, right? But
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff is opposite action. So try and do the opposite of what you feel like doing, and that can kind of help. Again, not the be all end all. I don't want to be the hypocrite and start giving everyone advice here, but it can just be helpful in terms of doing that. I think the other one, in terms of avoiding that sort of funk, is something we touched on last week, I believe, but we were talking about it today, how everything feels not normal anymore. And I think one of the big things is to try and create as much normality and much predictability in these uncertain times as you can. So if you're someone who's freaked out by how different everything is, try and recreate as much structure as you can. make a time that you get up, make a time that you shower. If you normally have to leave for work at 7:30, you plan your day around that and sit at your desk at home at 8 o'clock or whatever it is with your cup of coffee. Recreate as much of your normal routine as you can. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Make sure that you are eating properly. All that kind of stuff that you would do in your normal environment. Being at home gives us a lot more freedom to mix up our schedules and do whatever. But sometimes it's harmful for you if it sort of puts you into bad habits or makes you feel a little bit unsettled. So try and recreate as much of it as possible.
And that also, sorry, Chris,
Karen.
but that also creates a sense of certainty, because very often, because of the abnormality we're living in, by creating a bit of routine and getting up and doing stuff, it creates a bit of certainty that I'm at least in control of that.
Absolutely.
And I have more control over my life, even in a small way.
It makes things predictable, and that's what people need. People need predictability. It makes us feel safe. That's why we adhere to all these structures in our lives, because it makes every day feel predictable. And for most people, that gives us a sense of control, like you said, and it makes us feel safe.
Fantastic.
A big one we were talking about is allowing room for your feelings. So whether that's just giving yourself your own personal space, whether it's talking to other people, just normalize the sharing and expressing of feelings. Allow yourself to feel. Don't suppress emotions to the point where, like, I need to work, I need to do this, I need to get this done, so I can't afford to feel like this. That's fine temporarily. You're going into a meeting, you don't want to burst into tears. Cool, I understand that. But also later that day, make room to process what you're feeling. Think about how you're feeling. And like you said, you can even journal it if that helps you. Write it down or whatever the case may be, like you said, with the calendar. The last thing I just really, really want to highlight, I know I've said this ad nauseum today, but don't be afraid to seek help, guys. Please, 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 if you feel like you're not okay, don't feel like there's some threshold you need to cross before you have to make the big step of talking to someone. Talking to someone, seeking help is not a big step. Don't feel like it's, I'm depressed now. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be a dirty word. You don't have to be depressed in order to seek help. So don't worry about the label. Get all of that out of your mind and just say, you know what, I'm struggling and I'd like to talk to someone. SADAG is a great resource for that. Look them up. You can phone them. They'll tell you exactly where you are in your area, who's nearby you, who you can contact. They'll put you in touch. So it's a fantastic resource for that. If you don't know where the hell to start there. It's a toll-free number. They'll tell you who's around you, who you should talk to, and they'll help. So yeah, a great place to start.
On that note, if you want to get hold of SADAG, that's sadag.org. They have little tabs that speak about depression. They'll tell you about bipolar, suicide, anxiety, panic attacks, ADHD, OCD, trauma, substance abuse, and others. So it's definitely a place to find more information. But Chris, if anybody wants to contact you, where can we go and where can we find out more about you?
Sure. So I'm in private practice. My practice is called CC Psychology. That's the letter C twice. If you Google us, it should show up really easily. There's a website there. It's got our numbers, emails, all of that. So probably the best way, just punch that into Google rather than me reciting my email address.
Yeah. CC Psychology, fantastic. Christopher Kemp, thank you for joining us, guys. If you want to find out more about who I am and what I do, you can also check out lunchtimecoaching.co.za. And we're going to have these conversations every Tuesday where we are going to specifically speak about mental health and really just giving some wonderful practical tips on how we can curb us, getting ourselves caught up in it, or just learn some useful information. Chris, thank you for your time. Thank you for making the time for us. And we will chat to you soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Chat later, man. Thanks.
Thanks. Cheers, everyone.
Ciao. Bye-bye. All righty.